O Yamunumkum, I knew you were special. It seems we are truly meant for each other, for I too avoid grass-cutter meat. My mother and father warned me never to eat it. They said it would anger the gods. Ya's eyes widened with feigned surprise, though inside she felt a thrill. She had uncovered a hidden truth that could prove to be Bediako's weakness. Really? That's quite interesting, she replied, her voice soft. In an attempt to force Bediako to surrender, the king's men captured his beloved mother. When Bediako returned from the fields and found her missing, he tracked down the warriors, only to be met with an impossible choice: surrender himself to save his mother, or fight to fulfill his destiny to protect the kingdom. Now, as we enter part 2, Bediako stands on the edge of a life-altering decision. Will he sacrifice his mother to save his people, or will he surrender, risking the kingdom's future? As Bediako watched his mother being held at sword point, he felt his resolve shatter. Though every instinct within him screamed to fight, he couldn't bear to see his mother suffer for his choices. He dropped his weapons, hands raised, surrendering to Nana Koduah's warriors. His mother's eyes filled with tears, her heart breaking as she saw herself as a burden to her son's destiny. They marched Bediako back to the palace, where he was locked in a prison cell and bound in heavy shackles. Even in captivity, his strength was so feared that they took no chances, chaining him tightly to the walls. The prison was dark, damp, and silent, save for the echo of footsteps whenever a guard passed by. Not long after, Nana Koduah himself strode into the cell, his face twisted with a cruel satisfaction. He looked down at Bediako, who remained seated, his eyes steady despite his restraints. "Ah, Bediako," Nana Koduah sneered, folding his arms. "The great warrior, the mighty defender of the weak. Look at you now, bound like a common criminal. Did you really think you could defy a king?" Bediako glared up at him, defiant. "You may bind my hands, Nana, but you cannot silence the truth. One day, this kingdom will fall because of your greed. You have betrayed our people for the sake of wealth, selling lives to those who see us as less than human." The king's expression darkened, but he forced a mocking laugh. "Truth?" he scoffed. "What good is your truth now? You are nothing but a prisoner awaiting his death. I will not only kill you, Bediako, but I will destroy every trace of you and your family. I have already sent my men to capture your father as well. I will end your bloodline once and for all, and no one will remember the name Bediako." Bediako's jaw tightened, and his heart burned with anger. "You may kill me, Nana Koduah," he said, his voice steady. "But mark my words, when the ancestors see what you have done, they will send a punishment upon you that no wealth can shield you from. You think you can buy loyalty from the Europeans, but the day will come when they will turn on you, just as they have turned on others. You are a fool to believe you can control them." Nana Koduah leaned in, his eyes glinting with menace. "We shall see about that. Tomorrow, I will raid another village, one that holds no match for my warriors. I will capture their men, women, and children and hand them over to my European allies. And then, Bediako, I will return here to watch you and your mother suffer. I will show you that there is no force strong enough to save you." He straightened, a malicious grin spreading across his face. "Perhaps I'll start with her," he taunted. "Your precious mother will be the first to feel my wrath, and after her, it will be your turn." Bediako's heart pounded, but he held Nana Koduah's gaze. "Your greed blinds you, Nana. You do not see the storm coming, but it is coming all the same. When you face it, you will understand that no wealth or power can protect you from the justice of the ancestors." The king merely laughed and turned to leave. "We shall see, Bediako. We shall see." True to his word, the next morning, Nana Koduah led his warriors to a neighboring village, raiding it with brutal force. They captured men, women, and children, dragging them in chains back to the palace, where the Europeans waited eagerly. The exchange was swift. Nana Koduah handed over the captives in return for weapons, goods, and the assurance of European loyalty. With each trade, his arrogance grew, as he believed that nothing could stand in his way. As he returned to the palace, triumphant, he felt even more assured that Bediako had been nothing more than a nuisance. In his mind, the raid's success was proof that the warriors' warnings were hollow, that no supernatural force was protecting the villagers, and that no one could stop him. He would proceed with his plans, confident that his reign would continue unchallenged. But deep in the dark cell, Bediako remained resolute, knowing that though he was bound, his spirit was unbroken. And somewhere within him, he sensed that his time would come, that the ancestors were watching, and that Nana Koduah's unchecked cruelty would bring consequences beyond anything the king could imagine. On the day of Bediako's execution, the atmosphere was heavy with sorrow and fear. News had spread throughout the villages, and a great crowd gathered at the execution grounds, knowing they were about to witness the fall of a man who had dared to stand against tyranny. Men, women, and children, many of whom had heard tales of Bediako's bravery and strength, wept quietly, mourning the fate of their hero. The Europeans were present too, eager to see the man who had disrupted their lucrative trade in human lives finally meet his end. Nana Koduah arrived with a cruel glint in his eyes, relishing the sight of Bediako chained, powerless. Also, he thought, in a display of heartless brutality, the king decreed that Bediako's mother would be executed first, forcing him to watch as his beloved mother's life was taken before his own. As the executioner approached his mother, Bediako's heart thundered with rage and grief. He clenched his fists, feeling every fiber of his being seething with an energy unlike anything he had ever known. The anguish of seeing his mother about to be killed ignited something within him, a force as ancient as the earth, as powerful as the ancestors' wrath. The air grew thick, and a hush fell over the crowd as they sensed a strange change in the atmosphere. When the executioner raised his blade to strike his mother, Bediako let out a roar that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. His eyes turned blood red, his muscles surged with unimaginable strength, and his chains began to tremble. With a primal scream, Bediako tore the chains apart, breaking free with a power that defied belief. The crowd gasped in awe and fear as he rose, his entire body emanating an aura of indestructible might. In a flash, Bediako lunged at the executioner, delivering a single devastating blow that struck him down instantly. The man crumpled to the ground, lifeless, as if struck by a force beyond human comprehension. Bediako seized the fallen man's sword, his movements swift and filled with purpose. He now stood like a force of nature unleashed, a spirit of vengeance sent by the ancestors themselves. The warriors, shaken by his escape, quickly recovered and took aim, firing their guns in desperation. But to their horror, the bullets ricocheted off Bediako's skin as if it were made of stone. He moved through the hail of gunfire unharmed, each shot bouncing off him without leaving so much as a scratch. The villagers, watching in awe, murmured among themselves, This is no ordinary man. The ancestors are with him. Seeing their guns fail, the warriors charged at him with swords drawn, but every blade that touched Bediako's skin sparked as if striking iron against iron. He moved through them with unrelenting fury, each blow of his fists like a hammer, each swing of his sword a death sentence. The warriors fell around him, one by one, their lives taken by the unstoppable force that Bediako had become. The crowd stood in stunned silence, some weeping, others cheering quietly, as Bediako carved a path through the king's soldiers. His strength was otherworldly, a power that no one had ever seen before. His eyes, filled with rage and sorrow, were locked onto Nana Koduah, who watched from a distance, his smug expression now twisted into one of terror. As the last of the warriors fell, Bediako stood alone in the center of the battlefield, his chest heaving, his gaze fixed on the king. The crowd parted as he stepped forward, every soul there holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The Portuguese, along with Nana Koduah, were paralyzed with shock as Bediako, in an unmatched fury, fought through the warriors and Portuguese soldiers alike. He struck down 70 of the king's warriors and 15 Portuguese soldiers, leaving the scene painted in chaos and fear. With blood still staining his hands, he lifted his mother's lifeless body in his arms. His heart heavy and his face a mask of grief, he leapt over the execution fence, standing tall and defiant before the stunned crowd. His voice rang out like thunder, filled with both sorrow and power. "I am Bediako," he proclaimed, his voice strong and unwavering. "The gods are with me, and no man born of a woman can take my life." With those words, he vanished into the dense forest, carrying his mother to a place where he could give her a proper farewell. In the quiet sanctuary of the forest, beneath the shade of ancient trees, Bediako began digging his mother's grave with his bare hands, each handful of earth a painful reminder of the sacrifice she had made. When the grave was ready, he gently laid her down, his heart breaking as he knelt beside her, the weight of his grief settling on his shoulders. With tears streaming down his face, he clasped his hands, looking up to the heavens as he began his prayer, a mournful chant that echoed through the trees. He paused, his voice breaking as he pressed his hand to the earth, feeling his mother's spirit near. "Mother, forgive me for the pain my path has caused you. Your courage is now part of my blood, and I swear by the gods and the spirits that I will not let your sacrifice be in vain. I will carry your love as my shield, your strength as my sword. Guide me, as you always have, from the world beyond." With a final tear, Bediako placed a stone over her grave, a silent promise that he would fulfill the destiny she had reminded him of. After the burial, Bediako's thoughts turned to his father. He remembered Nana Koduah's threat to end his bloodline and knew the king's men would be hunting his father next. With a heart filled with both sorrow and fury, he tracked the warriors through the forest, moving silently until he reached a clearing where he saw his father, held captive and surrounded. The warriors, who believed Bediako had perished at the hands of Nana Koduah, froze in terror as he appeared from the shadows, his presence as imposing as a spirit risen from the dead. His piercing gaze fell upon each one of them, and in that moment they knew they were facing the wrath of a man untouched by death itself. Fear overtook them, and without a word they released his father, turning and fleeing into the forest, abandoning their mission in terror. Bediako rushed to his father, helping him to his feet, his relief evident in his eyes. Together, they journeyed to a neighboring village, the very village he had once saved from Nana Koduah's grasp. As they entered, Villagers recognized him immediately, their faces lighting up with gratitude and awe. Word spread quickly, and soon people gathered around him, calling him a hero, their savior. They lifted him onto their shoulders, chanting his name, a living legend among them. They carried him through the village, their joy and admiration filling the air. The villagers wasted no time, preparing a tent for him and his father, offering them food and safety. Bediako felt a renewed sense of purpose among these people who saw him as a beacon of hope. Here, he knew, he could gather his strength and prepare for the battles that lay ahead. Meanwhile, news of Bediako's escape and the slaughter of the Portuguese soldiers reached the ears of the Portuguese governor. Outraged by the death of his men and fearful of Bediako's growing influence, he confronted Nana Koduah with a dire warning. "Nana Koduah," the governor growled, his face twisted with anger, "you must put an end to this man, Bediako, before he becomes a symbol for every tribe you have conquered. If you do not kill him, I will have no choice but to join forces with those you consider weak. Together, we will turn against you and tear your kingdom apart." The threat shook Nana Koduah. The Europeans, his source of power and wealth, were now pressuring him to destroy the very man who had already proven nearly unstoppable. Yet fear gnawed at him, for he had seen the power Bediako wielded, a power that seemed protected by the gods themselves. Within the village of Niamekurom, Bediako had become a figure of reverence, seen by many as a hero, perhaps even a savior sent by the gods to stand against tyranny. The people respected him, grateful for his courage and strength in the face of Nana Koduah's oppression. However, behind the scenes, Niamekurom's royal palace was rife with tension. Niamekurom's throne was shared by two powerful families, a long-standing agreement that dictated the kingdom's rule. When one king died, his successor would be chosen from the other family, ensuring a balance of power. However, the current king, who had reigned for many years, was growing old, and the other family grew impatient. They felt it was time for a new king, and whispers of ambition grew louder. They saw an opportunity to accelerate the process by securing support from Nana Koduah himself, a man whose power they believed could solidify their position. In the midst of this, the opposing family had a beautiful daughter, Ya Munumkum. Known for her striking beauty and sharp intellect, she was considered an asset to her family. Her relatives saw her as the perfect means to sway Bediako, to exploit his weaknesses and potentially deliver him into the hands of Nana Koduah. They believed that if they could remove Bediako from the picture, they could then gain Nana Koduah's support, which would help them claim the throne and break the current king's hold over it. The family representatives traveled discreetly to meet with Nana Koduah, who was eager to hear any plan that involved the demise of Bediako. They bowed before him, and their spokesman spoke with a voice filled with cunning assurance. "Nana," he began, "we bring you news of great value. Bediako is hiding in Niamekurom within our village. We understand he is an enemy to your kingdom and that his death would bring you satisfaction and restore your favor with the Europeans." Nana Koduah's eyes narrowed as he listened. "And what do you propose?" he asked, his voice cold and calculating. The elder exchanged a glance with the others, a smirk forming on his lips. "We can help you capture him, or even kill him ourselves. All we ask in return is your support in securing the throne for our family. If you pledge your favor to us, we will ensure Bediako does not live to see another sunrise." Nana Koduah leaned back, a dark smile crossing his face. "You speak well. If you bring me his head, or ensure that he's dead, I will not only support your claim to the throne, but will also make sure Nyamekurom prospers under my reign. Do not fail me." The deal was struck. Yamunumkum's family returned to Nyamekurom, confident in their plan. They devised a scheme to use Yamunumkum as bait, intending to lure Bediako out and make him vulnerable to an ambush. They knew that Bediako, despite his strength and resolve, had a compassionate heart and was known to respect the elders and families of the villages he protected. Yamunumkum was instructed to befriend Bediako, to earn his trust and admiration. Her family believed that if she could get close to him, they could lead him into a trap where Nana Koduah's men would be waiting to finish the job. The game was set, and both families waited in anticipation. Little did Bediako know that the warmth and refuge he found in Nyamekurom hid a deadly scheme, one that would test his wisdom, his strength, and his heart in ways he had never imagined. Yamunumkum was unlike any woman Bediako had ever known. Her warmth, kindness, and presence filled his days with comfort and companionship, gradually weaving her way into his heart. She was always there, cooking for him with care, washing his clothes, and joining him on the farm. But it was her subtle gestures beyond these acts of service that truly captivated him, binding him to her in a way he hadn't anticipated. The first thing that deepened Bediako's affection was her thoughtfulness. Ya noticed how Bediako often carried the weight of the village's troubles on his shoulders, and she found ways to ease his mind. She would share stories from her childhood, tales of laughter and love, grounding him in moments of joy and simplicity that reminded him of his mother. These stories became a nightly ritual, and Bediako found himself waiting eagerly to hear her voice each evening. The second act that won his heart was Ya's small gifts, each one carefully chosen. She once wove him a bracelet from local fibers, a simple yet meaningful token. "Wear this," she said with a gentle smile, "to remind you that you're never alone." Bediako wore the bracelet faithfully, its presence on his wrist a comforting reminder of her kindness and support. Lastly, Ya showed him her fierce loyalty. When a small group of villagers spoke dismissively of Bediako's efforts to protect them, Ya stepped in, defending him with unwavering strength. She challenged anyone who doubted his intentions, her loyalty and respect for him shining through her words. Seeing her commitment to him filled Bediako with a warmth he hadn't known since the loss of his mother. He found himself drawn to her with a bond so strong that he couldn't sleep without the comfort of knowing she was near. While Bediako's heart grew increasingly entangled with Ya, Nana Koduah faced rising pressure from the Europeans. His desperation to meet their demands for slaves led him to devise a ruthless strategy. Rather than launching new raids, he resolved to exploit his own people, creating strict rules in the kingdom that would trap them in petty offenses, filling his prisons with minor transgressors whom he could then sell to the Europeans. The rules were harsh and intentionally difficult to follow, a reflection of his greed and disregard for his own people's well-being. These 5 new laws spread fear across the kingdom. 1. Marital interference. Law: any unmarried person who visited a married household without a valid reason would be fined heavily. A second offense would result in imprisonment, no matter how minor the visit. This law created constant suspicion, dividing families and friends. 2. Public display law. Any display of affection between a married couple in public was deemed disrespectful and punishable by imprisonment. The rationale was that such acts distracted from community work. Though it was clear the rule was meant to capture those whose loyalty to the king was doubted. 3. Community curfew. Law. A curfew was set in place, requiring all villagers to be within their homes by sunset. Anyone found outside after dark was immediately imprisoned, regardless of the reason. This rule kept people fearful, knowing they could be taken without warning. 4. Respect for Elders Act. Insulting or even questioning an elder was strictly prohibited. Any form of disrespect toward an elder, whether intentional or not, was punishable by immediate imprisonment. This rule often caused misunderstandings and led to unjust incarcerations, especially among the youth. 5. Strict theft rule. Even the slightest accusation of stealing, no matter how minor, was grounds for imprisonment. If a person was accused of taking food or belongings without permission, they would be thrown into prison without trial, effectively removing their freedom on the word of others. With these rules in place, Nana Koduah's prisons filled rapidly. Petty offenders, those guilty of nothing more than misunderstandings or small mistakes, found themselves locked away, their lives changed forever. The king's guards scoured the village each night, seizing anyone who dared defy the slightest rule. Meanwhile, Bediako grew closer to Yah, unaware of her family's plot with Nana Koduah. She continued to be by his side, all the while keeping a watchful eye, learning his movements, his strengths, and his moments of vulnerability. Yah Munumkum's family waited, knowing that each day she spent with Bediako brought them closer to their goal, and Nana Koduah watched, confident that the plan would soon bring him his greatest enemy's downfall. As days passed in Yamekurum village, Yamunumkum continued her mission, subtly observing Bediako and his father, searching for any vulnerability she could exploit. Bediako's father, a skilled hunter, would frequently return from the forest with his game, which he sold in the village marketplace. However, Yah noticed something odd. Though he often brought back grass-cutter meat to sell, it never made its way to Bediako's home. Other types of meat were always in their kitchen, but never grass-cutter, and this piqued her curiosity. The more she thought about it, the more she sensed a hidden reason behind this avoidance. One evening, as Bediako and Yah were enjoying a warm conversation by the fireside, Yah decided to test her theory. She smiled at him, speaking in a casual, playful tone. "You know, Bediako, your father must be an exceptional hunter. He always seems to bring back the finest game. But sometimes I feel hesitant cooking for both of you. I worry that one day I might accidentally prepare a type of meat that could be abominable to me, something I don't normally eat. I'd hate to unknowingly offend you or cause any harm." Bediako looked at her, concern written across his face. "Yeah, I wouldn't want you to feel uncomfortable in any way. What kind of meat do you avoid?" Yah hesitated, feigning a look of mild embarrassment before she answered, "I don't eat grass-cutter meat. It's just something I've always avoided." Bediako's face softened, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Oh, Yamunumkum, I knew you were special. It seems we are truly meant for each other, for I too avoid grass-cutter meat. My mother and father warned me never to eat it. They said it would anger the gods." Yah's eyes widened with feigned surprise, though inside she felt a thrill. She had uncovered a hidden truth that could prove to be Bediako's weakness. "Really? That's quite interesting," she replied, her voice soft. "Why would the gods be angered by you eating it? Is there a story behind it?" Bediako shrugged, his tone thoughtful. "My parents never explained why. They only told me that eating grass-cutter meat would bring the wrath of the gods upon me, and I trusted them. It was never a question for me. I've simply avoided it all my life." Hearing this, Ya sensed an opportunity to fulfill her family's plot and eliminate Bediako. She knew that Bediako's love and trust in her were strong, and she resolved to exploit that trust to the fullest. With this knowledge in mind, Ya began devising a plan, one that would turn Bediako's trust into his downfall. In the following days, Ya subtly set her scheme in motion. She prepared Bediako's meals with care, occasionally adding a special ingredient or spice that he loved, all while building up his trust even further. Each meal, each laugh they shared, and each moment they spent together only deepened Bediako's affection for her. She waited for the right moment, the perfect opportunity to make her move. Then, one evening, she prepared a dish with a taste that Bediako adored. She cooked it with skill and care, seasoning it to perfection, masking the flavor so that he wouldn't recognize the type of meat within. She had carefully chosen a piece of grass-cutter meat, cooking it until it was unrecognizable. As they sat down to eat, Ya watched him, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and guilt. Bediako took a bite, unaware of what he was consuming, and Ya hid her emotions, forcing herself to smile as they continued their meal. She chatted and laughed, all the while keeping a close eye on him, waiting to see if the effects of his transgression would begin to show. She hoped this betrayal would lead to his downfall, believing the god's curse would soon take hold. As Bediako ate the food Ya Munumkum prepared, nothing unusual happened at first, leaving her surprised. She had hoped the grass-cutter meat would immediately weaken him, but seeing no immediate effect, she hid her disappointment. Determined to test Bediako's strength further, Ya devised a plan to see if he was truly vulnerable. She told her father to disguise some of their family's men as captives of Nana Koduah's warriors, staging an ambush to lure Bediako into a fight. Trusting her judgment, her father agreed, sending men into the forest to act as prisoners, bound and guarded as though they were being led to the Europeans for sale. Soon after, one of the disguised men rushed back to the village, breathless, calling for Bediako and informing him that Nana Koduah's warriors had captured villagers and were preparing to sell them as slaves. Without hesitation, Bediako grabbed his bow, arrows and sword, setting off toward the forest, his heart filled with determination to free the captives. When he reached the scene, he found the men just as described, bound and surrounded by supposed warriors. Stepping forward, Bediako raised his voice, his tone commanding and fierce. "Release them!" he ordered, his hand gripping his bow tightly, ready to defend his people. But when the men refused, Bediako pulled back his bow to aim, yet something felt wrong. His hands shook slightly, his arms felt weak, and as he released the arrow, it wobbled and missed its target. Shocked, he tried again, but the results were the same. His hands trembled, his strength faltered. Growing desperate, he drew his sword, charging toward the men, but his strikes lacked their usual power and precision. It was as if he had never wielded a weapon before. Ya's plan had worked. The grass-cutter meat was taking effect, stripping Bediako of the divine strength he had relied on all his life. In his weakened state, he was quickly overpowered and bound by the disguised men. Bediako, the once indomitable warrior, was now a captive himself, his strength drained, his body heavy and frail. Word of Bediako's capture quickly reached Nana Koduah. At first he didn't believe it, convinced that such a mighty warrior could not be subdued so easily. Skeptical but intrigued, he set out with a group of his guards to see it for himself. The journey was long, and it took 3 days to reach the scene where Bediako was being held. But curiosity and anticipation fueled Nana Koduah's pace. When he finally arrived, he saw Bediako in chains, his once proud and powerful figure now bound and weakened. Even then, Nana Koduah's disbelief lingered. He approached cautiously, examining his prisoner with a mixture of suspicion and satisfaction. Remembering the stories of Bediako's impenetrable skin, he decided to test the warrior's vulnerability. Unsheathing his sword, Nana Koduah pressed the blade against Bediako's arm and applied pressure, watching for any reaction. To his satisfaction, the blade pierced through, drawing blood. For the first time, Bediako felt the pain of a sword cutting into his flesh, and a look of anguish crossed his face. The king struck again, each wound confirming that Bediako's legendary invincibility had been stripped away. Nana Koduah smiled with satisfaction, speaking loudly so all could hear. "Now that you are weak and powerless, Bediako, I will kill you in front of my people and the Europeans. They will witness my strength, and those who doubted me will bow down in shame. You thought you could defy me, but today I will show everyone who holds the true power." The king's words rang through the clearing as he ordered his men to prepare for the journey back to the palace, where a grand execution would be staged. He envisioned the sight of Bediako's fall, serving as a warning to anyone who dared question his authority. And so, as we await the next chapter in Bediako's story, we're left with questions about the fate of our hero, the price of Yamunumkum's betrayal, and the ultimate destiny of Nana Koduah's reign. Will Bediako find a way to overcome this curse and restore his strength? Will Yamunumkum confront the consequences of her actions, and will the gods intervene on behalf of the man they once blessed? If this story has captured your imagination, please show your support by subscribing to Anansi Web of Tales. Let us know where you're watching from, and remember, when you fall in love, don't get blinded. When you fall in love, don't feel too protected. When you fall in love, don't trust too much. And most importantly, remember, your secret is your power. Stay tuned for the next episode, where Bediako's destiny will unfold in ways we cannot yet imagine.